Welcome back to Bore Me to Bed. Tonight, we'll take a slow and gentle journey through the evolution of the wristwatch, a quiet story of how time moved from sundials and pocket pieces to the companion we wear on our wrists today. Settle in, relax, and let the steady flow of history guide you toward rest. Time has always been a quiet companion to humanity. Long ago, before any machines or ticking clocks, people watched the slow dance of sunlight and shadow to understand the passing hours. In the soft glow of dawn, a stone sundial would cast a gentle shadow that moved almost imperceptibly as the day wore on. By noon, the shadow would shrink directly under the sun's warm gaze, and as afternoon came, it would stretch out again, slowly drifting across the dial's face. By evening, when the sun sank low, shadows grew long and soft, eventually fading into night. There was no hurry in those early days of timekeeping, only the gradual shifting of light, a silent assurance that time was flowing onward. As the sun travelled across the sky, ancient people learned to mark its journey in subtle ways. In quiet temples, water clocks dripped steadily, each drop counting moments in a patient rhythm. In the silence, a single drop of water echoing in a bronze bowl was like the heartbeat of the night, steady and calm. By night, someone might tend a simple candle clock, watching the flames slowly melt wax to gauge the hours of darkness. In another home, an hourglass could be flipped, its fine sands slipping silently from the upper chamber to the lower, each grain a tiny moment falling in a hush. Such devices gently marked the passing time in the quiet of midnight. Many centuries passed before we found ways to measure time with machines. In medieval towns, great clock towers began to rise, their bells chiming softly across villages to mark each passing hour. These early clocks were towering creations of wood and iron, lovingly assembled by hand. They did not yet have faces or hands as modern clocks do. Instead, they kept time with the slow swing of weights and pendulums behind wooden panels. When their bells rang, the sound was deep and resonant, rolling over rooftops and fields to remind everyone listening that another hour had quietly slipped by. In monasteries, such bells gently summoned monks to prayer at dawn, noon and dusk, weaving the passage of time into their sacred routine. Whether in a bustling market town or a secluded abbey, the clock's bell became a kindly voice that gave structure to the day. Over time, these public clocks grew more refined. Craftsmen learned to add delicate hands and painted dials so that people could read the hour at a glance. In a small village square, one might see neighbours pausing under the clock tower to look up at the dial, its numbers arranged in a circle like the gentle path of the sun across the sky. The clock's single hand, for at first there was only an hour hand, moved gracefully from one number to the next. There was no rush in that movement, only a steady, reliable motion, as comforting as a heartbeat. As the art of timekeeping quietly progressed, people began to wonder if they could carry a clock with them, keeping time close at hand. Early inventors in the 1500s crafted what were essentially small clocks that could be worn or carried. These were called clock watches and were often worn on chains or as pendants. Imagine a heavy little brass sphere or drum, engraved with care, hanging from a ribbon or chain around the neck. Inside, tiny iron gears turned slowly, powered by a coiled spring that had to be wound with a key. These first wearable timepieces were not very accurate. They might drift by hours in a day, but they were marvels of their time. To their owners, they were treasured curiosities, gently ticking tokens of an emerging new age. Often they had only an hour hand, moving leisurely under a delicate pierced cover. The face was not covered with glass, but usually had a hinged brass lid with grill work so the time could be read without opening it. It was time, captured imperfectly in a small gilded box, worn close to the heart. Occasionally its owner might lift the watch and hold it to the ear, listening for the faint tick-tock within as reassurance that the mechanism was alive and well. Reading the time on these pieces required a bit of interpretation. With only one hand sweeping over a few large numbers, one could tell the hour, but the precise minute remained a gentle mystery. Still, it was a marvel to have even this much knowledge at hand. A tiny portable clock to accompany one through the day, like a secret friend that whispered the time. In those days, having a personal timepiece was a luxury and a wonder. A watch might be worn as a necklace or pinned to clothing rather than on the wrist. One of the earliest tales tells of a watch gifted to Queen Elizabeth I in the late 1500s, a tiny watch she could wear on her arm like a bracelet. It was described as an arm watch, an exotic jewel that also told time. In the candlelit glow of her palace chambers, the Queen might lift her wrist to admire this miniature marvel, its little dial capturing the wonder of courtiers who had never seen such a thing. It remained more a curiosity than a commonplace accessory, a delicate treasure that did not spark a broad trend. Yet it showed the enduring human fascination with wearing time as adornment. Even then, the watch was as much a piece of art as it was a tool, quietly ticking away amid the silk and lace of a royal court. By the 1600s and 1700s, the craft of watchmaking blossomed in Europe. Each generation of watchmakers found gentler and more clever ways to tame the heartbeat of a clock into something small enough to carry. They discovered that adding a tiny coiled spring, a balance spring first perfected in the late 17th century, greatly improved the regularity of a watch's tick. With this innovation, and others that followed, such as better escapements and tiny jeweled bearings to reduce friction, watches began to keep better time, their hands moving with steadier assurance. The familiar minute hand was introduced, giving watches two hands that glided in quiet circles across enamel dials. A glance at a pocket watch could now reveal not just the hour, but the minute as well, a more detailed whisper of the time of day. These centuries saw master watchmakers in London, Paris and Geneva refining their art year by year, creating watches that were not only more precise but also more beautiful. Pocket watches became treasured companions for those who could afford them, especially among the nobility and growing merchant classes. Picture a gentleman in a frock coat walking through a dim evening street lit by oil lamps. In his pocket he carries a smooth round watch attached to a chain. From time to time he pauses under the glow of a lamp, draws out the watch and presses a small latch to spring open its cover. The lid flips open with a soft click, revealing the glass-protected dial inside. The face beneath that glass might be decorated with ornate numerals or a subtle enamel design, and the hour and minute hands now allow a finer reading of the time. The watch ticks quietly in his palm as he reads the time, its faint ticking just audible in the hush of the evening, like a diminutive echo of the great clock tower down the street. He winds it every day, feeling the soft resistance of the mainspring as he turns the crown each morning to give the watch life for another day. It is a small ritual, a moment of calm connection with the passage of time. Around this era, the very word watch came into use, whispered down from old words meaning to keep vigil or guard. One account suggests it came from night watchmen timing their shifts, another from sailors timing their watches at sea. Whatever the origin, the name suits these devices that keep vigil over our hours, almost like a guardian of our schedule. A watch became a guardian of time for its owner, silent, faithful, and ever-present. And so for generations, time remained mostly in pockets and on chains, a secret shared between a person and the ticking piece they carried close. It was in the early 19th century that the idea of wearing a watch on the wrist quietly reappeared. In 1810, a master watchmaker by the name of Abraham Louis Breguet crafted a special timepiece for Caroline Murat, the Queen of Naples. This was not a watch to hide in a pocket or wear on a chain. It was designed as a bracelet to be worn on her wrist. Imagine the care poured into this piece, an oval watch dial nestled in a bracelet, the gold gleaming softly, perhaps with tiny jewels set around it. The hands moved gracefully over the face, and beneath the dial a finely made mechanical heart kept it ticking. It was a gift fit for a queen, meant as much to delight the eyes as to tell the hour. This delicate creation may well be considered the first modern wristwatch, even if at the time it was seen as a piece of fine jewellery. Decades later, in 1868, another significant wrist-worn watch was made, this time by the famed Swiss company Patek Philippe. They crafted an elegant little watch for Countess Koskowicz of Hungary, designed to be worn on her wrist as part of a bracelet ensemble. It was a dainty piece in gold, likely adorned with fine engraving or gemstones, quietly ticking away at her wrist. Like Breguet's watch before it, this too was a treasure for a lady of high society, beautifully ornamented and seen more as jewellery than as a practical tool. Such wristwatches in the 1800s were novelties, spoken of in gentle tones of admiration at gatherings, They were still rare and considered luxurious adornments rather than everyday instruments. The world of timekeeping was still, by and large, ruled by the dignified pocket watch for men, while the few wristwatches that existed were seen as ladylike trinkets, charming, but perhaps not for the serious timekeeper. Even outside the realms of royalty, the wristwatch quietly found its place in society. One can imagine a Victorian lady in the late 1800s sitting in a parlour with friends for afternoon tea. On her wrist glints a delicate bracelet that, upon closer look, holds a tiny watch face. As the conversation drifts and the daylight begins to wane, she might tilt her wrist ever so slightly to see the time on that miniature dial. The others hardly notice this subtle motion. It is far gentler than pulling out a larger pocket watch, yet it tells her that twilight is coming and it will soon be time to depart. In that simple act, the wristwatch has provided a silent guidance, allowing her to remain polite and engaged while still keeping track of the hour. Such moments, repeated in drawing rooms and gardens, helped make the wristwatch an unobtrusive aid in daily social life, well before it was fully embraced by all. Yet, these early wristwatches hinted at the future. By the late 19th century, most watchmakers produced a range of wristwatches, often marketed as bracelets for women. Still, they proved it was indeed possible and convenient to carry time on the end of one's arm, in plain view, without reaching into a pocket. It would take some time yet to overcome the skepticism of traditionalists, but quietly, the wristwatch idea was planting its roots. As the 1800s drew to a close, winds of change were quietly stirring in the world of watches. Certain practical-minded folks, especially those involved in military and exploration, started to see the value of wearing a watch on the wrist. It began in small ways. During the late 19th century, officers in some military units experimented with strapping pocket watches to their wrists with leather bands. In the 1880s, the Swiss watchmaker Girard Perregaux supplied a number of wristwatches to officers of the German Navy. These were robust, purpose-built pieces intended for use in active duty. Imagine those watches on sailors navigating calm seas at dusk, each officer glancing at the quiet dial on his wrist rather than fumbling for a pocket watch in the wind. The time could be read with a quick, unobtrusive glance, leaving the other hand free to hold a compass or a rail. It was a subtle convenience, but a meaningful one. Around the same time, British soldiers engaged in distant colonial campaigns, in places like the dusty plains of India or the wide deserts of Sudan, found wrist-worn watches useful as well. In 1898, the London jeweller Mappin and Webb offered a campaign watch, essentially a sturdy wristwatch, to military men. These early wristwatches for soldiers often had a protective metal grid over the glass, a guard against bumps and shrapnel, and sturdy leather straps to hold them on. In many cases, a watchmaker simply took a small pocket watch and soldered on little wire loops, called lugs, through which a strap could be attached. This clever modification allowed a timepiece to be worn securely on the arm, and in time it would become the standard design for all wristwatches. The dials were simple and clear, with numerals that could be read even under the dim light of dawn. For a soldier in the field, being able to check the time at a glance, hands-free, was quietly revolutionary. It meant being able to coordinate maneuvers at an agreed hour without signalling the enemy, or to know how long until nightfall without pausing to pull out a watch. The wristwatch was proving its worth not with fanfare, but with gentle, steady service in the most trying conditions. Even beyond the battlefield, pioneers of the skies were turning to the wristwatch. One famous story from 1904 tells of Alberto Santos Dumont, an early aviator, who found it impractical to use a pocket watch while piloting his fragile airplane above the French countryside. He asked his friend Louis Cartier, a watchmaker, to design something he could use more easily aloft. Cartier responded by creating a sleek, flat wristwatch with a small leather strap, a design that became known as the Cartier Santos. With this watch buckled securely, Santos Dumont could check the time with a flick of his eyes, all while keeping one hand on the controls of his delicate aircraft. In the open air high above the fields, with the faint roar of an engine and the wind brushing past, a quick glance at his wrist was all it took to read the hour. In the quiet of an early morning flight, with the sun rising over a misty field, one can imagine the pilot glancing at the softly gleaming dial on his wrist, and feeling reassured by the steady passage of minutes. The concept of the wristwatch was gently proving itself in different walks of life, from sailors and soldiers to pilots. each discovery adding momentum to a growing acceptance. In those early years of the 20th century, other watchmakers also sensed that the wristwatch's time had come. A visionary entrepreneur named Hans Wilsdorf, the young founder of the Rolex brand in 1905, believed deeply that a wrist-worn timepiece could be not only convenient but also precise. He imagined a future where a gentleman's wristwatch would be as dependable as the finest pocket chronometer, and he worked systematically to make that vision a reality. He worked tirelessly to refine the tiny movements and cases, improving their accuracy, shielding them from dust and moisture, and ensuring they could endure daily wear. In 1910, one of Wilsdorf's watches earned a notable certificate for accuracy in Switzerland, and by 1914, a wristwatch of his design received a prestigious award from the Kew Observatory in England for its precision. These achievements murmured to the world that a small watch on the wrist could be just as reliable as the revered pocket watch, dispelling the doubts of traditionalists. The craftsmanship of wristwatches was quietly coming of age. Then came the First World War, from 1914 to 1918, a tumultuous time that, among other changes, would firmly establish the wristwatch in everyday life. On the muddy battlefields and in the winding trenches, soldiers came to rely on their watches to coordinate the careful choreography of movements and artillery. There was nothing glamorous about these so-called trench watches. They were tools, plain and sturdy, built for function. Yet there is a certain poetry in how they served. A commander in a calm moment before dawn, with the cold air clinging to his skin and the first pale light of the morning gathering, might lift his wrist to see the faint ghostly glow of his watch dial. Many of these watches had luminous paint on their numbers and hands, often using radium, which softly glowed in the dark, allowing soldiers to read the time in the pre-dawn darkness without striking a match or flashlight. In the stillness, each man could synchronize his actions by that gentle glow, a collective agreement of when to move forward or when to be still, all coordinated by the watches strapped over their coat sleeves. By the war's end, the sight of a watch on a man's wrist had lost its novelty. Those who returned home kept wearing their trusty wristwatches out of habit and appreciation. A quiet transformation in fashion occurred. What was once considered a fad or a feminine accessory had become an accepted, even essential part of a man's attire. Newspaper articles at the time, written in 1916 and 1917, noted with mild surprise how the wristlet watch had gone from oddity to ubiquity, seen on the wrists of men everywhere. The practicality that war had revealed could not be unseen. Checking the time no longer meant pausing and fishing out a watch. It became a simple, fluid motion at any moment of the day. Society at large had discovered the quiet convenience of the wristwatch, and there was no going back. For many of that generation, a wristwatch was more than an accessory. It was a companion that had seen them through significant moments. A veteran might return home from the war with the same sturdy watch on his wrist, its once new leather strap now worn and familiar. As he settled into peacetime life, perhaps farming a quiet field or working in a small workshop, he would still glance at that watch to pace his day. The device that had calmly measured tense hours in a trench was now measuring pleasant afternoons in a garden or workshop. Each morning, he would wind it just as he had in years past, feeling the gentle resistance of the crown between his fingers and hearing the soft whir inside as the spring tightened. That small daily act became a comforting ritual, a moment of continuity linking past and present. With wristwatches now common, daily life itself took on a subtly new rhythm. People could coordinate meetings and mealtimes with greater ease, knowing everyone could check the hour at a glance. A shopkeeper could open and close precisely on schedule, without waiting for the town clock to strike. A schoolchild heading to class could make sure they were not late by a quick peek at the watch on their wrist. Timekeeping had become personal and immediate, and while this made life more punctual, it also brought comfort. The little clock on the wrist was a reassurance that one was in step with the world. There was a gentle confidence in being able to measure the day for oneself, a feeling that time was a friendly guide rather than an unpredictable element. The wristwatch quietly changed how people related to time. No longer distant and told by church bells alone, time became a familiar companion that one carried through every step of the day. In the peaceful years following World War I, wristwatches began to evolve in earnest, blossoming in both function and style. By the 1920s, almost everyone, from businessmen to schoolteachers to labourers, was wearing a watch on the wrist. Watchmakers, having proven their worth in war, now competed gently in peacetime to innovate and refine these little companions of time. The designs of watches became more varied and artful. The Art Deco style of the era, with its bold geometry and elegance, found its way onto watch dials and cases. Some timepieces featured clean rectangular shapes or stylized numerals and engravings that made them look like tiny works of modern art on the wrist. Some watches were made very thin and elegant, sliding comfortably under the cuff of a dress shirt for an evening out. Others were a bit larger and sturdier, with clear numerals for easy reading during a day's work. The wristwatch had become not just a tool, but a quiet reflection of personal style and of the time's aesthetics. This era also saw technical advancements that made wristwatches even more convenient. In 1923, an English watchmaker named John Harwood devised a clever mechanism that allowed a watch to wind itself automatically using the natural motion of the wearer's arm. No longer would one need to remember to wind the watch every day. This new self-winding watch would stay energized as long as it was worn. Inside the watch, a semicircular weight, a rotor, could swing like a tiny pendulum with each movement of the wrist, slowly tightening the mainspring. A person might occasionally even sense a subtle wobble, or hear a faint whir as this rotor spun inside when they flicked their wrist. It worked silently and continuously, turning the everyday motions of life into the energy that kept time. To the wearer, it was almost magical. The simple act of walking or gesturing was enough to keep the watch alive. This invention embodied the effortless nature of a new age of convenience, allowing the watch to be always ready, quietly keeping time without needing as much care. Around the same time, the quest to protect watches from the elements bore fruit. In 1926, Rolex introduced the Oyster, a wristwatch designed with a sealed case to be dust-proof and water-resistant. The name suggested it was as tightly shut as an oyster under the sea. To prove its worth, a Rolex Oyster was worn by a young swimmer in 1927 as she attempted to cross the cold English Channel. Hour after hour in the salt water, the watch remained on her wrist, submerged in the rhythmic waves. When she emerged from the sea, though exhausted from the swim, her watch was still ticking steadily inside its waterproof shell. The success of this test was quietly celebrated in newspapers of the time and in jewelers' shop windows, giving watch owners everywhere a comforting assurance. A sudden rain shower or an accidental splash would no longer be a threat to these well-sealed wristwatches. They could accompany one through the gentle rain, or even into a bath, faithfully keeping time amid the droplets. The late 1920s and 1930s also introduced other charming innovations. In 1931, the Jaeger-LeCoultre company created a watch called the Reverso, which had a clever reversible case. Polo players in India had wished for a watch they could wear during their games without worrying that the glass might shatter from a stray ball or a sudden jolt. The Reverso's rectangular dial and case could slide out and flip over to face inward, hiding the watch face behind a solid steel back for protection. After the chukkas were over, the wearer could slide and flip the case back around again, revealing the pristine watch face with its quiet ticking hands. Such inventions were born not out of urgency, but out of a thoughtful desire to harmonize the watch with every aspect of life, even the playful and strenuous ones, without breaking its calm presence. By the 1930s, travel and communication was speeding up, but the wristwatch kept everyone calmly synchronized. Imagine a passenger on a long-distance steam train, gazing out the window at fields and villages passing by. The train's gentle rhythm is almost like a heartbeat, puffing soft plumes of smoke into the clear sky. On the passenger's wrist is a modest wristwatch with a clean white dial. Every so often, as the sun moves across the sky, he glances at it to see if it's time for the next station. The watch ticks steadily in harmony with the subtle rocking of the carriage. Thanks to that little timekeeper, he knows that he will arrive just in time for supper at his destination, and he can relax and enjoy the scenery. Across the aisle, another traveller checks her watch too, and they exchange a polite smile. In that small moment, the shared knowledge of the time connects them without a word. Such scenes played out countless times, as the wristwatch quietly helped coordinate the modern world's comings and goings, one comfortable journey at a time. Through the 1940s, the world faced another great war, and once more the wristwatch quietly proved indispensable. Soldiers, sailors, and pilots of World War II all carried watches designed for their needs. These watches became standard equipment, ticking steadily amid the uncertainty of battle. Many were simple, rugged pieces with clear black and white dials, designed to be read at a glance. They were built tougher than ever, with improved shock protection so that even if a watch was jostled or dropped, its delicate balance wheel would keep spinning true. Pilots flying on night missions wore large, legible wristwatches that glowed softly so they could read them in the dark cockpits. On the seas, naval officers used their watches alongside sextants and stars to navigate through nights and fog. Each of these scenarios, tense in reality, was eased in a small way by the calm reliability of a watch keeping track of the passing minutes and hours. Even in difficult times, the watch remained a quiet, steady presence, a small comfort strapped to the wrist, reminding its wearer that time at least was moving in an orderly fashion. When peace returned and the 1950s dawned, wristwatches were a familiar and trusted part of daily life across the world. People from all walks of life now wore a watch, not as a novelty, but as an everyday necessity and habit. A teacher might glance at his wrist to time an exam. A shopkeeper might check hers to know when to close up. A mother at home might plan dinner by the hour, all relying on that steady tick on the wrist. The watch industry entered a golden age of creativity and technical progress. For every profession and hobby, it seemed, a suitable watch could be found. There were sturdy field watches for adventurers and softly refined gold watches for evening dinners. Some watches began to offer a window on the dial revealing the date, automatically advancing with each new sunrise. It was as if the watch was learning to speak not just of hours and minutes, but of days as well. New specialized watches emerged for new frontiers. In 1953, as scuba diving captured the public imagination, the first modern dive watches appeared. These were built to accompany a diver under the waves, with bold dials and rotating bezels to time their submersion. A diver could glance at his wrist underwater, in the muffled hush beneath the surface, and see a luminous dial shining back, telling him how long he had been below. The water pressure could not breach the watch's sealed case. The timepiece ticked on undisturbed in its tiny airtight world. One can imagine a diver pausing in the quiet depths, sunlight filtering down in pale beams, and seeing the hands of his watch continuing their slow circuit, a reassuring sign that all is well. Similarly, pilots of the new jet age wore chronograph watches with built-in stopwatches, allowing them to time flight maneuvers or navigation points. These chronographs had side push buttons that could start, stop and reset an extra sweep hand, all with satisfying clicks. Though capable of measuring fast-paced events, their presence on the wrist was still one of calm readiness, the watch ready to measure a heartbeat or a race, but content if left to simply mark the hour. In that same decade, explorers carried watches to some of the most remote heights on Earth. In 1953, when a team of mountaineers became the first to stand atop Mount Everest, the world's tallest peak, they did so with sturdy wristwatches strapped outside their heavy jackets. In the thin, freezing air, those watches ticked steadily, shrugging off the altitude and biting cold. For the climbers, glancing at their wrist at the top of the world was a humble reminder of home and schedule. A bit of ordinary life carried into an extraordinary place. Even on that lonely summit, far above civilization, time was still being faithfully kept on a wrist, one tick at a time. Around this same time that the watch began to embrace electricity, a new kind of timepiece quietly emerged. In 1957, the Hamilton Watch Company introduced the first electric wristwatch. Inside it, a tiny battery replaced the mainspring, providing power without the need for daily winding. The hands were still moved by gears, but the energy flowed from a small cell. A few years later, in 1960, Bulova unveiled the Accutron, which removed the traditional ticking sound altogether. Instead of a balance wheel, the Accutron used a tiny tuning fork vibrating at a high frequency to keep time. The result was a watch that hummed ever so softly rather than ticked, and its second hand glided smoothly around the dial without the usual step-by-step motion. To a person holding that watch to their ear, there was a faint calming buzz, a new sound of time, as soft as a faraway bee or a gentle electrical whisper. The watch's accuracy was remarkable for its day, gaining or losing only a few seconds per week. It was the dawn of a new kind of timekeeping, one that hinted at an even more profound change on the horizon. During these same years, the wristwatch even journeyed beyond the bounds of Earth. In 1961, when the first human, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, orbited our planet, he wore a simple wristwatch over the sleeve of his spacesuit. High above the blue Earth, in the silent weightlessness of space, that watch ticked away calmly, a steady reminder of home and the normal flow of time. A few years later, in 1969, astronauts on the Apollo 11 mission brought wristwatches with them to the Moon. As they walked in the powdery lunar dust with Earth hanging in the black sky above, their watches kept on ticking, unbothered by the lack of atmosphere or the lesser gravity. In the quiet vacuum of space, the watches had no air to carry their ticking sound, but they worked just the same, faithfully marking each second. It is a serene image. Even on the Moon, far from all life, a tiny piece of earthly craftsmanship measured time in the same steady way it would in a garden or a kitchen back home. The wristwatch had proven itself a loyal companion wherever humans ventured, whether in the depths of the ocean or the vastness of space, always keeping the beat of time with gentle certainty. In 1960, in fact, a specially built wristwatch rode on the outside of a research submarine to the deepest point of the world's oceans, the Mariana Trench. Hours later, when the vessel safely resurfaced, the watch was found intact and ticking, unfazed by the staggering pressure it had endured. This was yet another quiet testament to the resilience of good design, further proving that the wristwatch could brave any extreme and continue to do its duty. In the late 1960s, a new revolution in timekeeping arrived with barely a whisper, but its effects would resonate around the world. In 1969, Seiko, a Japanese watch company, unveiled a wristwatch called the Astron. What made it special was hidden inside, a tiny quartz crystal and a battery. When an electric current ran through the crystal, it vibrated at a precise frequency, like a tuning fork too small to see, and this steady vibration was used to keep time. The quartz watch was born. There was no need for mainsprings or balance wheels, no need to wind it. The quartz crystal quietly did its work, regulating the watch with an accuracy far beyond what most mechanical movements could achieve. In a way, it was as if the Earth's steady heartbeat, the natural vibration of quartz, had been harnessed to guide our clocks. At first, these quartz watches were expensive marvels, but as the 1970s progressed, their production became easier and more widespread. Electronics companies and traditional watchmakers alike embraced the new technology. By the mid-1970s, one could find simple, affordable wristwatches that ran on tiny batteries and quartz crystals, keeping time with extraordinary precision. A humble plastic watch bought at a corner shop could now rival or exceed the accuracy of the grand old pendulum clocks in town halls. In practical terms, this meant one might wear a watch for weeks without needing to adjust it, confident that it would be just as correct at the end of the month as it was at the beginning. This was a quiet wonder, considering that in earlier times one might have tolerated being several minutes off after only a few days if a watch had not been wound or regulated perfectly. For ordinary people, this accuracy felt almost magical after years of watches that might drift minutes off, if not attended to regularly. The new quartz watches were also delightfully convenient. They could be left unworn for days and still keep perfect time when picked up again, no winding required. During this period, watch design also took a leap into modern style. Some watches replaced the traditional dial and hands with digital displays. The first digital watches used tiny red LED lights to display numbers. If you pressed a button on your wrist in the dark of a movie theatre, glowing red digits would appear, shining softly to tell you the hour and minute, then fading back to black to save power. A little later, LCD displays that were always visible came along, with their gentle greenish-grey numbers on a black screen. These digital watches often had additional features. They could quietly beep at the top of the hour or serve as an alarm that chimed with a tiny electronic tone. Children of the 1970s and 1980s might remember falling asleep to the faint musical chime of a digital watch under a pillow, a new kind of lullaby courtesy of modern technology. Perhaps you can even recall the very first watch you owned as a child. Maybe it had a favourite cartoon character on its face, or a glowing dial you would check after bedtime. That first watch likely felt special, a tiny personal world of time that you could carry with you. Learning to read its hands or numbers was a proud moment of childhood, a gentle initiation into the habits of punctuality and responsibility. To wear a watch of one's own was to feel a bit grown up, yet also comforted by the ticking or blinking companion on the wrist. The shift to quartz was not without its quiet casualties. In Switzerland, home to centuries-old watchmaking traditions, many makers of mechanical watches found their skills suddenly less in demand. The 1970s became a challenging time for these craftsmen, as the world seemed to move on to quartz and electronic watches en masse. Factories that had once been filled with the sounds of ticking escapements and watchmakers' tools grew silent or retooled to make electronic components. It was a gentle fading of an era. Yet, the old art of mechanical watchmaking did not disappear entirely. For some people, the steady tick-tock of a mechanical watch was a beloved sound they were not ready to relinquish. After all, a mechanical watch has a kind of heartbeat, the balance wheel swinging back and forth that lends it a gentle auditory presence. A quartz watch, by contrast, is almost silent, its tiny crystal vibrating thousands of times a second far beyond human hearing. Both kinds of watches honoured the flow of time, but one did so with a rhythmic pulse that could be felt and heard, while the other worked in quiet invisibility. The choice between them became as much about emotional connection as functionality. In this way, some companies continued to produce fine mechanical watches for enthusiasts and connoisseurs who still found something soulful in the ticking of gears. These mechanical watches, now often regarded as luxury items or works of art, carried on a legacy, waiting patiently as the world rushed into the digital age. By the 1980s, the watch world found a new balance between quartz efficiency and the enduring love of classic designs. In Switzerland, a playful and affordable line of watches called Swatch emerged in 1983, bringing colour and youthfulness to wrists everywhere. These watches were quartz-powered and mass-produced, but they celebrated style with bright hues and artistic dials. A Swatch watch might have a splash of neon or a whimsical pattern, ticking cheerfully and accurately. They were light-hearted and accessible, reminding people that wearing a watch could be fun and expressive. It wasn't unusual to see someone sporting a bright plastic watch to match their outfit, or even collecting a few with different designs for different moods. This helped revive the Swiss watch industry, proving that there was still great affection for the wristwatch, even in a digital era. Around the world, people paired these new watches with their outfits as casual fashion statements, all the while benefiting from quartz precision. The quiet ticking of an analog swatch in a teenager's room became as common as the digital beep of a calculator watch in a classroom. Speaking of calculator watches, the 1980s also saw the popularity of multifunctional digital watches, especially from makers like Casio. These were the kind of wristwatches that could do more than just tell time. They could store phone numbers, set multiple alarms, and even perform calculations on tiny numeric keypads. A few models included miniature games or digital melodies, turning the watch into a little toy box as well as a timekeeper. On a lazy afternoon, a child might sit and idly type numbers on the small keypad of their watch, marvelling at how this little device on their arm could be a miniature computer. The watch continued to evolve from a single-purpose timekeeper to a tiny assistant for daily life. Yet all these new functions were integrated in an understated way. The watches remained compact and familiar, quietly waiting on the wrist to be called upon. Meanwhile, the art of mechanical watchmaking experienced a renaissance among enthusiasts. As quartz watches took over everyday use, mechanical watches found a new identity as treasures of craftsmanship and tradition. In the 1980s and 1990s, many people began to appreciate the intricate beauty of a mechanical movement, with its hundreds of minuscule parts working in harmony. High-end watch brands continued to create mechanical wristwatches that were like symphonies in miniature, some with classical designs that harkened back to earlier decades, and others pushing forward with complex features. Watches emerged that could show not only the time and date, but the phases of the moon, or chime softly on the hour with tiny gongs hidden inside. These complications, as watch features are poetically called, were not necessary for most people's daily needs, but they brought joy to those who loved the artistry of horology. Owning a fine mechanical watch became akin to owning a piece of heritage, something to cherish and perhaps pass down, its steady tick connecting generations. At the end of a calm day, one might take such a watch off, turn it over, and gaze through the clear back at the movement. There, a balance wheel still oscillated back and forth, and gears nestled together, all moving with a mesmerizing, deliberate grace, powered only by springs and ingenuity. In the silence of the watchmaker's workshop, those motions had been coaxed to life by patient hands. One can almost see the craftsman hunched gently over a wooden bench, a magnifying loupe at his eye, as he tightens a tiny screw or places a drop of oil on a gear the size of a pepper seed. Each component is fitted with care, each movement in assembly measured and calm. The creation of such a timepiece is a ritual of precision and peace, every step as unhurried as the ticking that will follow. As the century neared its close, the wristwatch quietly gained even more intelligence. In 1990, a German company, Junghans, introduced a watch that could set itself by radio. Inside its case was a tiny receiver tuned to a distant atomic clock broadcast. Whenever the watch caught that signal, often in the middle of the night when the airwaves were calm, it would adjust its hands to the exact correct time down to the second, without the owner moving a muscle. The watch's owner might wake up in the morning knowing their timepiece had silently communicated with an official clock while they slept, waking to a watch that was perfectly in sync with the world's time. It was as though an invisible hand reset the watch to absolute precision, bringing atomic clock accuracy to the bedside table. It was a gentle marvel, timekeeping that took care of itself, aligning with the universe's own standards without any effort from the wearer. With the turn of the 21st century, the wristwatch continued to adapt quietly to the changing world. Mobile phones and digital gadgets became part of daily life and began offering their own clocks, yet the watch did not disappear. Instead, it learned new tricks and took on new roles in this digital age. Early in the 2000s, some watches came with built-in personal organizers or primitive touchscreens, hinting at the possibilities to come. Far from fading away, the wristwatch was quietly preparing to transform itself once again to remain relevant. By the 2010s, the age of the true smartwatch had arrived. These were wristwatches in shape, but with the brains of a small computer. They could light up with a gentle glow to show not only the time, but also the content of a message from a friend, the number of steps you had walked that day, or the current rhythm of your heartbeat, or even how well you slept last night. Some could even listen for your voice and respond to questions, or guide you turn by turn through city streets with a quiet tap on the wrist. The watch was no longer just a timekeeper, it had become a tiny information hub on the wrist, marrying the old concept of time-telling with the new world of connectivity. Even the newest smartwatches can be used in the service of tranquility. Consider someone practicing meditation in a quiet room. They might set a gentle vibrating timer on their smartwatch for 10 minutes and then close their eyes. In the stillness, they pay attention to their breath while the watch counts the seconds in silence. When the time is up, the watch doesn't ring aloud or startle them. It simply gives a soft buzz against the skin, like a mild tap to let them know their session is complete. The person slowly opens their eyes and taps the watch to stop the timer, grateful for the silent reminder. In that moment, the advanced technology on their wrist behaved with the same gentleness as a friendly nudge, fitting perfectly into the calm routine. It's a reminder that however sophisticated watches become, they can still blend quietly into our peaceful moments, serving us without disturbing us. Despite all this new capability, the essence of the watch remained comforting and personal. A smartwatch might gently vibrate to catch your attention, perhaps to remind you of an appointment or nudge you to stand up and stretch your legs after a long sitting, even encouraging you to take a deep breath and relax. In a sense, the watch had come full circle. Once merely a passive keeper of time, it now actively helped people mind their well-being and schedule, all while still sitting in the familiar spot on the wrist. And for those who found solace in the old ways, traditional watches continued to be made and loved. It was not uncommon for someone to wear a sleek digital watch during a morning run, then later don a classic analog watch with ticking hands for a quiet evening out. The two worlds coexisted peacefully, each offering its own kind of comfort. The modern watch offering connectivity and data, the classic watch offering a connection to history and a simpler rhythm of time. Yet both, at their core, still do what watches have always done: faithfully mark the moments of our lives and quietly keep us on track. Today, a glance at one's wrist can mean many things. It can be the soft green glow of a fitness band showing a heart rate, or the warm metallic sheen of a mechanical watch's hands pointing to the hour. It might be a vintage piece passed down from a grandparent. Picture such a watch nestled in its worn leather strap, the glass crystal bearing a few scratches from decades of use. When wound and held to the ear, it still ticks with a comforting steadiness. The same sound that perhaps once guided its previous owner through his or her own days. Having such an heirloom on the wrist is like wearing a fragment of history, a gentle reminder that time links us to those who came before. It could just as easily be the latest digital display, silently updating with the weather forecast or an unread message. Whatever form it takes, the wristwatch remains a quiet companion in our lives. It marks our meetings and meal times, our sunrises and midnight hours, sometimes without us even noticing its faithful presence. It's also touching to realise how watches often witness the moments of our lives. A wristwatch might be present on a parent's arm during the birth of their child, its hands quietly moving while new life enters the world. Years later, that same watch might be on the child's wrist at a graduation ceremony or on a wedding day, counting down the minutes to an I do. Through celebrations and challenges alike, a first job interview, a long journey abroad, heartfelt goodbye, the watch on one's wrist is a silent observer. We glance at it in moments of nervousness, of excitement, of boredom and of relief. It ticks steadily through laughter and tears without judgment. In this way, a humble wristwatch becomes interwoven with personal memories. When we hold a timepiece that has been with us or our family for many years, we are holding an object that has quietly ticked through countless stories. Its value isn't in gold or jewels, but in the faithful companionship it provided through all of life's chapters. Many watches carry inscriptions or dates on their back, marking them as gifts of love or gratitude. A graduation year, an anniversary, a note of affection from parent to child. This way, the watch becomes a storyteller, quietly bearing personal history along with the hours and minutes. Time itself is a curious thing, invisible, intangible, yet constantly felt. We can't hold a moment in our hands, but with a watch, we try to capture a little piece of time and make it our own. In a way, every watch is an attempt to give form to the formless, to tame the ever-flowing river of time into measured segments we can understand. This desire to interact with time, to count it and keep it, is deeply human. It's comforting to look at a watch and see order, numbers and hands that assure us a minute is a minute, an hour is an hour, no matter what changes around us. Throughout history, as people built and wore watches, they were also building a sense of control and companionship with time. The watch doesn't make time move any differently, but it makes the journey through time a bit more familiar. With a watch by our side, or on our wrist, we feel that time is not just slipping away, it's being noted, appreciated, and shared in the quiet ticking of a tiny instrument. And in the still moments, the watch is there for us. Consider the end of a long day when the world goes mostly silent. Perhaps you set your watch on a bedside table. In the darkness, you might hear it faintly, a soft tick, tick, tick like a gentle heartbeat in the room, or perhaps no sound at all if it is digital. Only the quiet assurance that time is still being kept as you rest. The evolution of the wristwatch is ultimately a story about our relationship with time. From sundials to atomic clocks, from pocket watches to wearables, we have sought to carry a little piece of time with us, to measure it, and sometimes even to forget about it. Through it all, the watch on our wrist has been a loyal guardian, asking little and giving much. It frees us from worrying about the sun's position or the length of a candle. It lets us simply be, living our moments while it keeps track of the hours. Through changing seasons and passing years, the watch continues its gentle duty. In summer's green and golden days, it ticks under warm sunlight. In winter's quiet nights, it beats softly while snow falls outside. The world may transform around us from spring blossoms to autumn leaves, but the faithful watch carries on marking each hour in the same steady way. This constancy is a comfort, a reminder that even as life changes, time itself moves with a calm and steady cadence. In a workshop long ago, a craftsperson bends over a wooden bench by candlelight, carefully assembling the tiny wheels of a clock watch that will be worn on a silk ribbon. The room is quiet and dim, the only sounds the soft scrape of metal on metal and the steady tick of a larger clock in the corner. The craftsperson's hands move slowly and deliberately, piecing together a miniature marvel that will carry time itself. In a trench at dawn, a soldier checks the glowing dial of his wristwatch and feels a bit less alone amid the mud and mist. The faint green luminescence of the numbers reassures him in the chilly pre-dawn gloom. For a brief moment, as he listens to the distant quiet and holds the watch close, he's connected to a sense of normal time. Breakfast at 7, sunrise soon, even while the world around him is far from ordinary. Under the sea, a diver's watch shines in the blue depths, its hands visible by the soft light filtering down. The diver pauses, floating weightlessly, and sees the dial glowing gently as it marks the minutes of his dive. In the silent underwater world, that steady glow and the assuring tick, inaudible but imagined, keep him company, reminding him that time still flows normally even where sound and light are strange. In space, a gloved hand adjusts a watch strapped over a bulky spacesuit, while the blue curve of Earth rises slowly in the black sky beyond the window. There is no up or down in the weightlessness, and no day or night in the endless darkness, but the watch on the astronaut's wrist still marks the familiar hours. Each second that ticks by on that tiny dial is a comforting echo of home, a gentle rhythm persisting even in the void. And now, in your own room, a watch quietly marks this very moment. Each tick or soft blink of its dial is a reminder that time is flowing gently onward, carrying you with it. And with that reassurance, you can let your mind drift, knowing that time will keep watch for you until morning. And so our journey comes gently to a close. From sundials and pocket watches to the quiet glow of today's smartwatches, time has always been at our side, moving calmly forward. As your eyes grow heavy, you can let go of the ticking and turning of the history, knowing that time will keep watch for you until morning. Thank you for joining me tonight on Bore Me to Bed. Sleep well and good night.